Node.js applications uses a single-threaded event loop to handle multiple concurrent clients. That is in contrast to many technologies that follow multi-threaded request-response architecture. Before we move on, I would like to take a few minutes to explain how this works, because it is important in order to create non-blocking efficient applications with Node. When a client sends a request, the Node server places this request into a queue known as the event queue. If you don't know what a queue is, you should check out my DSA course down in the description. Node.js also contains a limited thread pool, which it will use to handle blocking operations. Internally, the server has a component known as the event loop. It runs forever, handling requests, and it uses a single thread only. It constantly checks for requests in the event queue, and if it finds any, it will pick this request up and start processing it. It will first check whether this request contains any blocking operations, such as accessing a database or a file system. If not, then it will process the request in place and send a response back to the client. If, however, the request contains some blocking operations, it will use a different method. Node will take a thread from the thread pool and it will assign it to this request. This thread will perform all of the blocking operations, prepare the response, and send it back. If a thread is taking too long to execute, it is called blocked. While this thread is running, the system cannot handle requests from any other client. And this is why it is very important that when we write our code, we do not block the event loop. We will see what this means in practice later on, but it is important for us to get everything clear before we dive deep into coding with Node. I would now like to set up our database. In order to do that, open up a browser and navigate to this link, which is in the video description. And I'm simply going to copy and paste the commands to a new terminal. We need to install curl, so I'm going to do it. Run the command again. We get OK, as we should. Once that is done, we can go to the starting MongoDB service section and run the following commands. Now we can check the status by running the status command, and we can see that the service is active. Just hit Ctrl+C to get out of this screen, and we can also run the enable command to make sure that the service will always run. If we now type Mongo, we get into the console, and from here we can control our database in any way. The first thing we need to do in order to configure our database will be to create a user. We can assign different roles to users and in that way restrict and manage them. You can read about all the available roles in this link, which will also be in the video description, and you can see we got all sorts of roles. Each of it provides different actions which the user can perform. I will be using the DB owner role. So in order to create a user, we need to run db.create, and I will write this right here because this is multi-line. And here we can pass the user, which will be the username. I'm going to call mine db admin. We can pass the password. I'll just pass a demo password. And here we can pass an array of roles, which will be an object. And here we can pass the role, db owner in my case, and the database, which will be admin, the default database. This should be db, and here this is create user. Now we can just cut that. Here we can type use admin to select the admin database and simply paste the command. As you can see, successfully added user. Now we can simply close this browser and open up Compass and actually connect to our database. Click right here, advanced connection option. Address and the port are correct, and I'm going to go to authentication. Choose username and password, and right here I'm going to fill in the details that we passed right here, db admin and my password, and the database will be admin. I'm going to simply save that and connect. Give it a name of default. And as you can see, we can access our database, which right now is completely empty. From here we can go ahead and connect our application to the database as well. In order to do that, I'm going to first import the MongoDB library. So const mdb is going to equal to require like so. And we'll also need to install it. So let me exit the shell and go to desktop server. Here you can type npm install save mongoose at 6.2.11. This will be our version. Once that is done, we can simply go ahead and run mdb.connect, like so. Right here we pass the connection string, always start with MongoDB, and the first parameter we pass in is our username, so this will be dbadmin. Then we pass our password, then we type at our address, so localhost, and our port, and then we can specify our database. I'll just pass in some more parameters here. Use new URL parser is going to be true, and use unified topology is going to be true as well. This is really all we need in order to access and handle our database from our Node application. What I would like to do next is to register our first user. In order to do that, I'm going to create a user schema, simply because this will make our lives a little bit easier. Please note though that MongoDB is schemaless. It does not require schema, and so you really don't have to use it, and you'll see later on that we can push object without any schema. But for the user itself, I am going to go ahead and create such a scheme. So in order to do that, I'm going to create a new folder in my server. I'm going to call it model. Go to it, and here I'll create user.js. Open it up. And the first thing we need to do is, of course, to import Mongoose. So I'm going to do it. Now we can create a new schema by saying const user scheme, or any name you like to give the schema. Go to new mdb.schema. We can specify the collection to which this schema should apply, and I'm going to name mine users. This needs to be an object. Right in here, we can pass all the fields that we want our schema to validate. So the first field I'll pass will be username. Here you can specify the type, so I'll say the username needs to be a string. You can say whether it is required, and I'll say true. And I'll also say that it needs to be unique, meaning that no two usernames can be the same. I'm going to copy that for the password and just remove the unique, because we can have two passwords that are the same. I'm going to say user also has an email, which is unique. We don't want to have duplicate emails. A phone, which is unique as well. Phone. I'll have here a boolean that'll say phone valid, which is of course not unique. This will indicate whether the user performed a validation of their phone number or did not. I'm gonna have first name and last name, and two more parameters, which will be salt and pre-salt. I'm going to call this salt post and salt pre. You will see what those two will be. And for now, this will be a schema. Now MongoDB will validate the user according to this schema. If we save that, we can now go to server and import our user. So I'm going to say const user. It's going to be equal to require module user. Can now go to register and create a user by saying user.create. And here we pass the user object. So now let's get all the required fields in order to create our user. There are a few parameters we simply get from the user, so I'm going to simply get them from the request body. I'm going to say const username. Let me just check that this is exactly the name. I'm going to change this to username as well, because we will need to enter the name exactly as it is spelled here in order for this to work. Save that. I'm going to say const username is going to be equal to rec.body.username. Same for password and email and phone. Also first name and last name, and this is really all the parameters we get from the user. The only parameters left is the phone valid and our salt and pre-salt, which we will create right now. So I'm going to say const phone valid simply to keep the same name. It's going to be equal to false, because as the user registers, the phone is not yet been validated. And now for the post salt and pre-salt. Those will simply be two random strings. They can be of any length you like, and they will simply use us in order to secure our database a little bit more. We're going to encrypt our password right here using SHA-3 512. Hashes tend to have a lot of databases in which the most used passwords are stored. In that case, a hacker that got our database can simply run all of our hashes against that database and get some passwords. In order to prevent that, we will add a string before and after our password before we hash it, and in that way the hash will not be susceptible. Let me show you an example. Let's say the database contains the hashes for 123 and ABC, and it has the hash for them, some complicated string. If we take this password and now add a salt to it, which will be some random string, plus ABC plus another random string, and then we hash it, this hash will no longer show in this database, and so the attacker will not be able to crack the hash. So this is what we'll do. We're going to generate such a random string. In order to do that, I'll use a standard function. You can enter the characters and the length, and it will return a string of that length with the characters randomized in it. The code is really not very complicated. I will not really cover it. Feel free to go over it yourself. The function is simply called makeID. You give it a length and it returns back the string. So I'll simply say that post-salt will be makeID of length 5, same for the pre-salt. The only thing left to do in order to create our user is to encrypt our password. Like I said, we will use SHA-3 in order to do it. I'm going to import the library and say const SHA-3 is going to be equal to require SHA-3. We'll also need to install it. So let me first navigate back and I'll say npm install, say SHA-3. Now let me actually change this to pass, because this will not be the variable that we will use to create our user, and I'll create a hash. So const hash is going to be equal new SHA-3, and I'm going to say 512. Then we can update the hash with our password, so I'm going to say hash.update. Here we can pass the pre-salt plus our password, which will be pass, plus post-salt. This is the string that we will be hashing. Now we can simply say const password equal to hash digest hex. Now that we got all the variables with the correct names, we can simply pass them in. So I'll say username, password, email, phone, phone valid, first name, last name, and let me quickly change that to pre-salt and post-salt. So we'll say pre-salt, post-salt. If we save that and now try to send our request, localhost 3000 at register, change that to post. In my body, I can fill in all the information. So I'll say username, test, pass, let's do 1234, email, our first name, last name, and we can hit send. We can see we got an error, user.create is not a function, and that is because we forgot to export. So I'm going to say right here const module is going to be equal to mdb.model user scheme. Here we pass our user scheme, and now we simply export it, module.export module. This should actually just be module. Now if we try to send again, validation error, user scheme, validation failed, phone valid is required. So we're missing two paths, phone valid and phone. Let's see what's going on. I misspelled valid right here. Let me just change that real quick. And we did not pass phone right here, so let me add that phone, just some random number, try to send that again. We can see we get a response, and now if we go to our compass right here and hit refresh, we can see we got our users collection right here. If we go into it, we can see our user with all the data that we passed to it, including this field ID, which is managed by Mongo. As we can see, we got a hashed password as a result of our hash digest right here and the hash update. This is simple as that to use it, and our pre-salt and post-salt are random 5 characters. That will be all for this one, guys. If you have any questions or suggestions, feel free to drop them in the comments down below. In the next part, we will dive deeper into what we can do with Mongo and Node.js. Hope you enjoyed, and see you in the next one.